this event is now being recorded. Yeah, if you could please stay muted, at least while the speakers are doing their thing, that'd be much appreciated. Most importantly, it'd be great if you could ask questions in the chat as we go along. Well, we might not have any time because I totally balls up the technical execution of this morning. But if we do have time at the end, we'll ask the speakers some questions. So last time on 5 Things, we had Janine, Arusa, and Lindsay. They shared our 5 key takeaways from sabotage on the other side of freedom, and all that remains. I highly recommend checking that out, and the recordings on the 5 Things Twitter account. And this is only the 9th 5 Things, believe it or not. Most of those have taken place during lockdown, but man, have we got through a lot of stuff. Look at all those wonderful books that we've managed to get through. So that'll be 45 books if I do my sums correctly. And we've also had some incredibly lovely and smart and articulate speakers. If you whip to the next slide, Denny. Look at all those lovely faces. Anyway, delight to add 3 new speakers to this highly distinguished group. And we'll not muck about anymore. So first up is Mark Schaeler. And Mark is founder of the Do Lectures, author of 2 books, Do Present and Do Disrupt. He's creator and presenter of the fabulous podcast, Doing Things Better and Doing Better Things. I'd say, like, from my experience so far with Mark, aware of most excellent jumpers as well, which I feel I've got competition there, and all around bloody nice bloke. So Mark is going to share his key takeaways from the Daily Stoic. Mark.
Muted. A mild correction there. Thank you so much. I'm not a founder of the Do Lectures. That's David and Claire. I'm one of 5 people that came in and helped in the early days, and they don't need that help anymore. They're flying, which is a great success story as far as I'm concerned. But we were there at the beginning, so thank you very much for that, Andy. And yes, thank you for inviting me. What a joyous thing. I'm a bit embarrassed that I didn't realize it existed before. And just a quick message, Mike Coulter can't get in. He's just texted me. So if anyone could just email Mike Coulter with the right details, that would be fantastic. Save me doing it while I'm chatting. So the Daily Stoic. I saw Ryan Holiday speak at one of the Do Lectures years ago and really enjoyed his words, and the Daily Stoic was bought, and I read about a week's worth and put it away. And I was really happy to have it on my bookshelf. But like all the best books, the ones I've got on meditation, the ones that I've got on changing my diet, the ones that I've got on changing my mind, they remained pretty much unread. They were just there, and I could go, yeah, look at me. I'm so bloody woke. I'm all over the Stoic stuff. And then lockdown happened, and I started doing Qigong every morning in my garden. Qigong's like it's like Tai Chi. It's a form of meditation, movement, and breathing, actually. And it was ace. So I turned the camera on. First day, I'd never done it before. I'm not a teacher, but I do it in the garden on my own. So I thought, well, I'll turn the camera around, pressed go live, and I had 7 people on day 1, and 4 of which lived in my house. All 4 kids, my granddaughter, my son-in-law, everyone lives in our house over lockdown. She's been amazing and equally noisy. And 7 people joined me, and that grew to like 100 and odd people. We're down to 50 now. People have drifted back to work, and I don't mind. I'll do it if there's just me. But after about 2 weeks, Andy, I realized that I was running out of things to say, and I needed something just to give us a focal point for the rest of the day. And so I picked this up. In fact, it's my wife's idea. She said, why don't you do a reading from the Daily Stoic? So I did. I picked it up, and I now read the Daily Stoic every day. So 5 things from it. Do you want to click onto the next slide? Well, firstly, the book is about daily reminders. This is my summary. Daily reminders to bloody well get over yourself. Daily reminders to lift yourself out of your own misery and your own joy, and to look at things in a neutral way. That's the key thing. And actually, this ties into a really great meditation I did on from Rohan, who I owe a massive debt of gratitude for his rain meditation, I should say, because sometimes when you stop observing and start feeling too much, then you get stuck in that. So this is a reminder of that, and thank you, Rohan. Okay, next one. So this is a phrase. This doesn't come from the Daily Stoic, but it's written all the way through. This theme runs through the Daily Stoic like the words Blackpool through a stick of rock. And I was reminded of this when I picked the book up, but I was also told this when I have swimming lessons, not because I can't swim, but because I want to swim better. And I said to my swimming coach, he said, what do you want to do? You can swim. What are you here for? And I said, oh, I want to swim. I swim like a boxer and I want to swim like a swimmer. And after about 3 weeks, he said, yeah, stop fighting the water. And this theme comes through massively. If you don't want to be a fighter, if you don't want to be a boxer, if you don't want to tackle everything with, I won't say aggression, but with aggression, then stop, then pull back. And that theme runs all the way through it. And we come back to that. I would say every week there's an element of the Stoic that prompts me to go, if you don't want to be a boxer, stop fighting. So it runs all the way through it, like ripple through a raspberry ripple ice cream. And next slide, please. Now, I am not a teacher. And for the first, you develop your own kind of catchphrases, really, don't you? So no splay, no play was one of the things I said right at the beginning, and that carried all the way through. And the other one is, I'm not a teacher, I'm just a bloke doing qigong in his garden. The thing is, I am a teacher because I'm teaching people. Okay, I might have 50 in the morning, but I've got 450 people watch it every single day later. And the thing about the Stoics is they may not have wanted to be teachers, but their words, the words that were written in plays, not as teachings, they lead us all. So if you think you're a teacher, if you're up on your feet, helping people think differently, then you're a teacher. The Stoics are teachers. I'm a teacher. You're a teacher. Everyone's a teacher. Next slide, please. So then I wanted to pull something from the Stoic. And again, this comes up a lot. An event itself is objective. How we describe it, how we view it, how closely we hold it to ourselves, that is subjective. And that is what does the harm. And we cling to pain. We cling to the bruises of the past. And they are bruises, not tattoos, because at least we're feeling something. And there's a massive theme all the way through the Daily Stoic about just letting stuff go and not owning it, not just the negatives like the hurt, but not owning too much the positives either, and just being able to let things come and things go. So the subjectivity, that's the challenge. So we need to be very objective about this, lift ourselves up. And this theme comes through again and again, and it sits deep in meditation, but it also sits deep in Qigong and Tai Chi. As we move, we can feel the wind. We can just feel it moving through, and to let it go through, that's the key. There's a great Chinese proverb about wind. When it's windy, you can either build a wall or you can build a windmill. And you build a windmill because the wind comes through and you take its power rather than it buffeting you around. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a really great one. So this is from Seneca, Theastes 440. And I love all that. I love reading all the numbers out. No one's making notes, Andy. I'm just reading the numbers out like I should be in church, and I'm not a churchgoer. Want makes you a servant. Tantalus asked, the highest power is, and Theastes says, no power if you desire nothing. Just have a little moment to think. And while we're doing, at the end of Qigong, there's a little moment called bamboo in the wind, where you put your hands on your lower dantian, just below your belly button, and you stand with your feet together and you close your eyes and you just let your body rock and sway, and you let it move in whatever direction it wants to move into. And that's when I do a little, I won't call it a sermon, but just a little bit of provocation. And just think about your desires and how they control you. And I don't mean addictions, but of course I do. Our lover, the lover part of us is all about addiction, or all about being underpowered. Balancing it is really important. But those things are the things that tie us up in knots. So nothing has power if you don't desire it. So this again comes through again and again and again. I could have picked any. Frankly, there's 366 lessons in here, not 5. It was really tricky, Andy, trying to work it all through. Okay, number 5. And the most important one, a habit starts with day one. And on day one of the Qigong and of day one of picking up the Daily Stoic, I didn't know I'd still be there 9 months later, every morning, picking up the Daily Stoic, to the point where if I have to go to London for work or I have to go and do something different, I take a photograph of it and stick it on my Instagram, because people want to read it. I've created my habit, but I've also created everybody else's habit as well. And having that little moment of meditation every single day, having that little poke to get us to think differently, it really matters. And each chapter is themed, as I'm certain you're aware, Andy. And this December's is a really challenging theme, actually. I've not enjoyed it. December's is about the meditation on mortality. And we're absolutely crap at looking at our own mortality, but it's a gift. Being mortal is a gift. And so each one of these, it can be, this month can be slightly depressing, but I'll take the darkness, because there's light coming. Next Monday, everything changes. 21st of December, we get light coming back. And so I will begin to enjoy, I've begun to enjoy the change of seasons. So my habit of getting up at 5:30, going for a walk for an hour with my wife, coming back, turning the camera on, talking about some of the things I thought about. And look, I talk utter shite on this. I'll be talking about why I think coots are the best parents on the lake, but the worst neighbours. I'll talk about why gulls have got serious attitude problems. I'll talk about how Nick and I were discussing the childishness of wanting to see a squirrel curl itself up with its own tail in its arms, right? We talk about utter rubbish, but what flows out of this habit? The key thing, and if I can boil all this down to one thing, is community. All I am is someone who's brave enough to turn the camera on and talk rubbish. There's now regularly 50 people, and they chat all the way through. And if someone's feeling down, you can feel the attention shift to that person, and you can feel the love move to that person. And I then see this community emerge throughout the rest of the day on social media, and I can see that this community has a weft and a warp and a tight fabric that will not let any one of us fall. And all I do is turn the camera on. I don't create the community. It's the community that creates the community. And this book has been an absolute godsend, because it sits right in the center of it all, and it pulls us together. Yeah, there you go, summarized in one slide. I needn't have spoken, really, need I, Andy? I could have just stuck that up.
There's my slide. Thanks so much, Mark. Oh, can we hear that?
Like being at a football match.
Well, it's like being at home watching a football match now.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
Thanks so much for that, Mark. That was incredibly lovely.
No problem.
Yeah, and if anyone's got any questions about that for Mark, yeah, if you would mind lobbing in the chat. I think Mark's thankfully sticking around till the end, so hopefully we'll get a chance to chat a bit more about that. And we'll move straight on, just because we're a little bit behind. So next up is Jen, and Jen's a journalist, editor and founder of The Flock, an ad-free digital magazine for women, founded just back in June 2020. I was very surprised it was still such a fledgling startup. The platform recently won the Startup Prize at the Creative Edinburgh Awards 2020, and has been long listed for this month's UN Women Awards, and I think that's massively deserved too. So Jen is kindly going to share her key takeaways from the yet to be release, I believe, Good Enough. Jen.
Morning, everyone. Yes, it is yet to be released. It's coming out on December the 31st. And effectively, it's to try and counteract that sort of barrage of new year messaging that we all get every year that just makes us feel a bit shit about ourselves. So what's interesting about this book is that it was largely written prior to the pandemic and slightly updated as a result of it, but it feels like it's kind of only become more current as a result of 2020. Eleanor Ross, who wrote it, is a 32-year-old London-based journalist who is originally from Sheffield. And on the face of it, she's a huge success. This is her second book. She's written for every big newspaper and magazine going. She's traveled the world doing it. But like I think probably many people in the media, the picture looks a lot rosier than it is. And like many freelancers, she didn't want to say no to any work. She said yes to every project. She was completely overwhelmed, to the point that in 2019, she found herself exhausted, depressed, and ended up in A&E on suicide watch. Now, before I go on, I'm going to read a little bit about the introduction because she can probably explain her motivations for writing this better than I can. She says here, I've just dropped my mouse, excuse me. She says here, with COVID, I think we're all starting to reach forks in the road, working out what we're happy to put up with and what changes we want to make. And this was my fork. One path, it's more of the same. It's staying at work late. It's trying to get to the gym every morning. It's scrolling through social media and wondering why we're not in Tahiti. It's cramming a hastily cooked ready meal into our bodies and immediately feeling guilty about it, but knowing that we have no choice if we actually want to see our friends after work. It's reading about the lives of celebrities and setting our alarms to 3 a.m. to see if getting up early and taking cold showers has any effect on our productivity. It's taking a vacation, but spending it learning how to ski or speak Japanese instead of reading a book. It's about an exhausting, fulfilling, but ultimately busy life that's so intense we just want to scream, stop. In Gio Tolentino's book, Trick Mirror, she says, being alive seems to be about organizing your life around practices you find ridiculous and possibly indefensible. So maybe we should think about stopping that. The other path, there are fewer people yelling at you on social media platforms. Your boss isn't always messaging you on your personal phone. You have time for yourself doing the things you actually want to do, and it's a little brighter, and perhaps it could be the new normal. What happened to our generation that made it feel fine to say yes to everything? Can we blame everything on the 2008 recession and social media, or is there more at play? And effectively what this book is about is answering those questions. What is it that drives us to hammer ourselves into the ground in pursuit of success? And is the success that we're told to crave what we actually want in the first place? If we could go to the first slide, please. So the fear of mediocrity is real and it has a name. The name for the fear of mediocrity is coinophobia. And effectively, it's the fear of ending up in the same place as our parents forever, of living in a semi in suburbia, wearing cardigans unironically and dying without an obituary. And it leads many people to feel torn about their futures from a young age. Where do they want to be? Where do they want to move to? What should they do? Go, go, go. We have to do it all. And then it leaves us feeling guilty when it doesn't work out, or we want to return closer to home, to be near our family, to put down roots, to start our own family. So we're in this constant drive to outrun it, and it's leaving today's 20s, 30s, 40-somethings completely burnt out. Mental health's in crisis, we're working longer hours, but the inequality gap is going. And what she's saying here is effectively, we've been raised for a world that doesn't exist. Since probably people who are in their younger 40s downwards, we got into this idea that we told every child from the day they were born that they're special. And to be special, there has to be a normal, there has to be a baseline, and most people have to sit on that. But when we tell every single person that they're special, what it leads to is this coinophobia, this idea that we need to be special. And so we've all been told that we can do anything that we want if we just work hard enough, but that idea relies on us living in a meritocracy, and we don't. You only need to look at the Houses of Parliament right now and the number of well-connected and completely useless old Etonians that are in there to understand that nepotism is very real indeed. But what happens if we're told that we're special and brilliant and we can all be Prime Minister is that when we aren't and we don't blame the system, we blame ourselves. If we could go to the next slide, please. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to outrun a system that wasn't built for what we were told it was. And it's exhausting. We're all on a treadmill and trying not to fall on our arses. But during COVID, we've had a clearer indicator than ever before of just what it is that we're up against. And towards the start of the book, and I realize all of this sounds quite doom and gloom, it is going to get better, I promise. But Eleanor looks at the exam results scandal. and the fact that an algorithm was applied to the marking of kids who missed their exams. And the algorithm was slightly different across all 4 home nations, but it produced a very similar trend across all of them, which is that kids from state schools were far more likely to see their teachers' predictions downgraded. The less successful your school had been historically, the more dramatically you were going to be downgraded. And what that effectively showed us in black and white was that when broken down into code by computer, what we've long failed to acknowledge is that those who start with more achieve more. And that's the system that so many of us are fighting against daily in a less visible way. It's present in our offices, at our board tables, in our management charts, all across Britain. But that is where we start punishing ourselves and thinking that, okay, I'm not getting ahead, but I've been told that I'm special. Therefore, what I need to do is I need to work harder and I need to work longer. And those expectations begin to creep into our non-working lives too. And this is where I found the book very interesting. If we could go to the next slide, please. We are effectively monetizing or making transactional every aspect of our lives in a bid to get towards success. And what the book does very successfully is break down all of these different aspects where we're applying these measures of success to things in life that really should be a joy. So if you take food as an example, ready meals were created as time savers when women started entering the workplace in recognition of the fact that people couldn't do everything. What they are now is they are seen as a negative, which to a large degree nutritionally they are, but what that results in is everybody trying to cook sustainably, locally, organically, all the time. And when you fail, you feel a stonking case of the guilt. It makes us feel crap. Same goes for the gym. It should be about, as Mark was saying, moving your body to feel better, to feel healthier, to feel more at one with yourself. But now it's become about success and self-discipline and how we're told that the most successful people in the world get up at 4 a.m. to work out every day. And anyone who's ever posted a run on Instagram knows that there is a certain amount of performative nature to it all. We want people to know that we're doing it right. And then something I found really interesting was the fact that over just the last few years, the word hobby has been almost lost in our vernacular to the term side hustle. And side hustles can be a brilliant thing. They can give huge satisfaction to an awful lot of people, but they've created this idea that all of our downtime and our hobbies need to be spent being productive. And whether it's painting or jam making or writing or making clothes, the kind of overarching idea now is that if we're not making money from it or trying to, then we're not doing it right. And maybe you just want to have a hobby that doesn't involve the admin of eBay or Etsy or Instagram, but that's become kind of demonstrative of a lack of ambition almost. And this whole thing, it works within a system that just isn't working for an awful lot of people anymore. And I found the chapter here on housing incredibly interesting, where Eleanor is younger than me. She's a millennial, and a lot of this is very much geared at that generation. But since the 1980s, we've worked towards this idea that the right to buy a house is just that, a right. And yet the differential between average salaries and deposits and mortgages has grown ever larger. The rental system hasn't kept up, and it infantilizes grown adults. And so there were these kind of quotes in the book that I was really taken aback by, but that make perfect sense, from people saying, I've grown up watching cookery shows and interior shows, but I'm 35 and I'm relegated to one tiny shelf in a communal fridge, still sharing a house with people. I can't paint my walls. I can't hang pictures. I'm not even allowed a cat. And the whole system is kind of then pushing back all of the other success markers of success that we've lined up for adulthood. If you're renting, do you feel secure enough to start a family? If you're saving for a deposit, can you afford to take time off? Can you afford to spend time with your friends? It has a huge impact on all of the other aspects of our life. So yes, it does all sound a little bit hopeless, but it's not, because if we can move on to the next slide, what she's actually trying to do is say, in this year, particularly, we all have an opportunity to reconnect with ourselves and accept that the notion of success and the markers that we use to measure it are actually largely irrelevant to many of us. And if you can ignore the bin fire that's going on outside the window for a moment and stop and ask what we're doing it for, it becomes a little bit clearer that actually a lot of the time we're doing it because we think we should and not because we want to. And there's an incredibly interesting chapter about friendship and community and how important it is to people. And it delves into a lot of historical and anthropological research about how we build our villages and our support system. And our obsession with the hustle and the strive is actually very detrimental to the way that we operate as a society. And historically, we've found that societies were tended to be organized into a large group of around 150 distant acquaintances. And it moves ever closer till you've got a group of sort of 5 confidants. They're the people that you would call in an emergency. And biologically, we have a finite amount of social capital to spend to spread across that group. The average person today has 338 friends on Instagram, but feels lonelier than ever. We're trying to spread that social capital across a greater number of people all the time, and not actually taking the time off to be able to assess how we're doing it. And a lot of the modern markers of success, notoriety, audience, 10, 20, 30,000 followers on Instagram to support those side hustles, are leaving us feeling like we're spread far too thin. And what we're losing out on there is human connection. We're networking instead of connecting. And that's a very easy fix. We can choose to pull back. We can choose to check out the digital world on occasion and prioritize family and friends and reconnect with the people that matters. And 2020 has actually illustrated that for a lot of us, it's those connections, those in-person connections that we crave. And that actually a lot of the goals that we're striving towards every day aren't helping with that. And some very small changes can have a very dramatic impact on that. If we could go to the last slide, please. So essentially, at the heart of it, the book is, conversely, given the title, which is Good Enough, the Myth of Success and How to Celebrate the Joy in Being Average. It's not really about being average. It's more a call to individualism. It's saying that not everything is futile and pointless, but rather that we're all striving to someone else's idea of success. And if we just stop and ask ourselves why we're doing what we're doing and what our ultimate aim is, then we could all be a lot happier. It's basically saying you do you. If you want to learn Japanese on holiday, that's brilliant, get in there. But if you feel like you have to learn Japanese on holiday because the idea of 2 weeks of being unproductive fills you with dread, then the chances are the last thing you should be doing is taking a learning holiday. It's more about realizing that it's absolutely okay to find the joy in the mundane, in a walk on the beach and swimming and sex and eating the goddamn cake. And we can choose to keep our hobbies to hobbyism and not try to monetize them. And we can choose to reduce our hours and reduce our salaries and not strive for the big house, if that means that we've got more time to socialize and to breathe and to spend time doing what feels important to us. And what's really interesting about that is that what she's saying is if we really do want to be special, maybe we do it by trying to change the system, changing the rental system, setting up businesses that are expressly aimed at changing the way that we work, from HRs pushing blind recruitment to the zebra businesses that are trying to find a more ethical way forward. The things that give us a real feeling of accomplishment aren't necessarily the things that are going to drive us towards our financial goals, but they will provide us probably with greater benefits on a personal and societal level. So it's really about just saying, if you're knackered, you can put the ball down. You can go and choose to play on a different field. And actually, in doing so, you might just find a less mediocre way to be than you are on in the current state. And that's kind of my crib notes on Good Enough.
Oh, sorry, I forgot the applause app. Most important, I've got one job, really, haven't I? And Thanks so much, Jen. Well, that really hit home for me, big time. So hopefully, I can't wait to read that book. Actually, is it out sort of
December the 31st? So just in time for all the other diet and work harder books.
Oh, I can't wait for that. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jen. Yeah, again, if you've got any questions around that, then ping them in the chat, and hopefully either Jen can answer them or give some feedback through chat, or if we have time at the end. Anyway, finally, we have Rohan. Rohan there.
Hello, I am here.
Hello.
Hello.
So Rohan is head of product at the NDS at NHS Scotland. And prior to that, he ran Mindfulness Everywhere, where he was the creator of Kyra, Sleepfulness, Designing Mindfulness, and the best-selling app Buddhifies, which I initially heard about Rohan, and an app that's made me weirdly familiar with Rohan's voice. He was also on Wired's magazine's Smart List of 50 people who will change the world, which is amazing.
That was ages ago, though, so
well,
don't believe those lists as well.
It takes a long time to change the world, Rohan. He's also the host of Meditative Story, and his first book, Modern Mindfulness, is out now, so I highly recommend go and get that. I'm super looking forward to this next book. I'm reading it right now. It's one heck of a story. So Rohan's going to share his thoughts on Amateur by Thomas Page McBee. Rohan.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks everyone. And yeah, it's lovely to see so many familiar names in the participant list, and recognised from different parts of my life over the last 10 years of being in Scotland and actually elsewhere as well. So yeah, so just a story of how I got to this book, I guess. So because it's 2020, I have a podcast, or I host a podcast rather. So and it's not a side hustle, actually. It's actually one of my jobs, I guess. So and the way it works, it's called Meditative Story. I'm not plugging it, but I'm just mainly to sort of explain the route to Amateur. So the way it works is that every week someone tells a story about a sort of a pivotal moment in their life, and from all sorts of different walks of life. And I effectively do a couple of things. I do an intro to it, but also I based on the story and the theme of the story, I create a meditation sort of that jumps off the themes from the story, so that the podcast sort of flows into a meditation practice at the end. And I also pop up during the story with little sort of meditation prompts. And what that means is that sort of every week I receive a story so that it's based out in New York, and I receive a story on Google Drive, and so over the last year we've done almost 60 episodes. So actually over the last 2 years, 60 episodes. And so I've just taken on a lot of different people's stories and sort of snacked on a lot of people's lives. And when I'm trying to write a meditation based on someone's story, sometimes it's actually really hard, because it's hard to find the practice. Sort of tricky to say, but it's hard for me to find a hook for me to go in, and just maybe the story is a bit flat or doesn't quite have the magic. But so one of the weeks, so Thomas Page McBee was one of our storytellers, and it was sort of the easiest story to write for, just because it was a beautifully told story, but also had so much sensuality to it, had so much reflective quality. It's all the ingredients that allowed me to allowed me sort of to wrap a practice around it. And it was just really, like, of all, like, some of the episodes sort of really just wash away in my mind, but actually this one's really stuck. One of the ones that really stuck with me, and I sort of followed that lead. And in the story on the podcast episode, he tells the story of the fight. So and that's why I've got more deep into his work and this book in particular. So I'll say maybe go to the next slide, Andy, and I'll say why, what it's about. So you'll be familiar with this idea of like white collar boxing, right? So the idea of sort of bored hedge fund managers in their lunch break going to sort of boxing gyms and doing sort of amateur fights, and that's a phenomenon sort of in different sort of cities, and that happens in New York. And so as part of that, like, you know, because of the nature of those different sort of organizations, so there's some charities where you can basically, if you do the training and do the fundraising, you can do an amateur fight at Madison Square Gardens, you know, which is the sort of the holy place of boxing in the States, at least historically. And so Thomas does that. He basically takes on the challenge for himself to train for a fight and train for a charity fight at Madison Square Garden. So like in one way of seeing this book, it's like one of those books about, it's like you see these books all the time, like a journalist who comes up with a conceit for a book, and they're like a challenge book, right? And sells it to their publisher, and they're like, okay, that sounds fun. And then, you know, they do one of those every 2 years, and then that becomes their sort of thing. And I've become a bit sort of cynical about those kind of books. So when I sort of first saw Amateurs, oh, it's about this sort of, you know, he set up this conceit and his sort of artificial conceit to then tell a story around. But actually, it's not really about like, it's not really about. It's very much around. So because it's about what Thomas learns in the process. It's about the fight is really just the architecture for an exploration of him to understand or explore masculinity further. He's effectively like, you know, he's as a writer and as a journalist and as a commentator, his specialist subject is masculinity in the modern world. And I guess one particular angle on that is that he's a trans man, and so it's very, very particular. So the real pitch of the book is like, you know, this is the story of the first trans man to fight at Madison Square Garden. But that's just the marketing picture. So it's much more about that, because I think it's about I think it's really lovely, like really sort of dangerous question, actually. It sort of started sort of primed at the front around why do men fight, and he sort of starts unraveling that. So that's what it's about. So it's a very sort of compelling conceit, I think, or compelling idea. Andy? So I guess the first thing I'll say is just like the first point is sort of very clear. Like the more I was sort of reading the book, is that like actually I don't know much about my sort of ignorance of the trans experience, I guess. And that was sort of and yeah, that was just very, like, I found it quite because the book isn't about being trans, but it's just that's the lens, and yeah, that's who Thomas is. And so obviously he talks about that and the impact of that in his training and so on. And you know, personally, like I do a lot. I read a lot of video games criticism as one of my, that is a hobby, and I don't have time to play video games, but so I live like vicariously through reading about them, listening about them, and there are lots of trans video critics certainly in the spaces where which I think are good. And so I've come across that experience but that's very particular, and it's sort of about they don't necessarily talk about the experience of being trans in their writing. And so this is actually my first sort of reading of a more detailed story from a trans writer, and that was really interesting to me, and interesting in the sense that like it was my first, and also interesting to me in the more general sense of could it be a way to sort of understand more about people that I don't an experience, and people that I don't have a lot of experience with today. So that was sort of a meta point to start with. Andy? So there's a I guess coming to the book, there's a sort of romantic idea of in our culture of like the boxing ring, you know, the language, sort of the Norman Mailer sort of, if you're sort of familiar with that sort of more sort of late 20th century, like romanticization of boxing and the dance, and, you know, two men sort of dancing around in this environment, and like the romanticization of the big fight, and that sort of all sort of plays through in the sort of marketing of modern sort of professional boxing. But I think what was really like, but that's often very much like, but the lens that Thomas brought to it, you know, he does talk about how surprising, you know, because going into a locker room as a trans man, and not, it's an interesting theme actually. He doesn't sort of, although, like, you know, he says very clearly, like, if anyone were to look him up, you know, his identity as a writer is very much around being a trans writer, and so it wouldn't be very hard for any of the people in the gym to sort of Google his name and find out more about him. But he never declared it or spoke about it during the fight, in the gyms he trained at, and during the process. Other than to a couple of the organizers, just for sort of legal reasons, which was interesting as well. That's a sort of a small sideline. And so there's this really interesting theme of like how you know, he comes to this space in a way that most people don't come to that boxing training space, and his reflections on physicality, touch, and intimacy were very evocative to me, and quite sort of, it gave a different perspective on that sort of very hyper macho romanticization of boxing. And I just want to read it's a beautiful book as well, but I was going to read a very sort of simple excerpt, really. It's like, so he's just finished sparring with someone he's really struggling with. He's struggling in the sense that the person he's sparring with is better than him, and he's just not having a great time. And if an alien had landed in that boxing gym and had to describe the behavior of male humans, surely it would have concluded that we touched each other as much in love as in violence, that the former, in fact, inspired the latter. If anything appeared innate, it would surely be the affection between us. And just as a sort of sideline, if you are interested in amateur, I really, really recommend the audiobook as well, because Thomas's reading of it is fantastic. Andy? Again, you know, there's so much in the book to get into, and I think one of the things that, when you read something where you like, I read it and I sort of, it's one of those books I have in like three formats, Kindle, audiobook, and physical, and like so I can sort of experience it in different ways. But there's like one bit in it where I was just like, oh shit, there was just like an insight. And so throughout the book, he tells the story of the training and all the characters he meets, and obviously the fight itself. He tells a little bit of the story of his own experience and his own backstory. Not too much about that, but a little bit of that. And it's also peppered with research and interviews he's done with sort of masculinity scholars and so on. And in one of those, he talks about how the sort of two different, one of the people he's interviewing talks about how do people define becoming a man? It's like, becoming a man is that, you're no longer a boy. So that's one sort of like a rites of passage interpretation or understanding of being a man. But then he contrasted that very much with a sort of 20th century American idea of being a man is defined in opposition to not being a woman. And that sort of starkness of that contrast and the power dynamic and all the downside that comes with that, and the disempowerment that comes with that was very striking when I sort of heard that for the first time. And yeah, that was just what I wanted to mention. Andy? I think so. I was running a bit late, so I'll rattle through this last two. I think if you're interested, I came to this book sort of as a sort of new dad, and I was interested in like understanding like what being a dad was, and I think I found a lot of succor and nourishment from this book, because I think Thomas talks very much around how there is a cultural norm around what masculinity is, and the way he expresses like that masculinity is one thing is absolutely a myth, and there's an opportunity for or there is a diversity of modes of masculinity and ways in which that is expressed, and that was very valuable to me through the book. And finally, Andy, I just sort of unfinished with a meta point really, is that the book's actually really short. Like it feels a bit like the book, it feels a bit like a poem, and it feels a bit like the fight itself. You know, an amateur fight is 3 rounds of 2 minutes. It's very short. It goes in and out. If you watch some video footage of Thomas actually fighting in that fight, his style, you know, he goes in and out. He's quick, but like, and that's what this book feels like. It's like almost like I feel like he was trying to. The form of the story is the form of his fighting style. It's the form of that fight itself. It's the form of. There's just a lot of beauty in the way the story is constructed. I really appreciated that. It's not really explicit, but it felt like the form was absolutely the right way to. And you know, I've read a lot of non-fiction books where, you know, they outstay their welcome, and it's just got in and out, hit you, hugged you, and then left. And I think I really appreciated that. So that's my piece.
Thanks so much for that. Oh, that's a different applause there. Slightly more muted, not intentionally, but thanks so much for sharing that. And I do highly recommend reading that book. I think, as you said at the end, Rohan, it's very poetic, and which might be in contrast to what we might expect from a. It's definitely not a boxing book, but highly recommend that. Because I totally screwed this up at the start, it is now 9 o'clock. So again, I apologize for the total being the technical mishap at the start, but unfortunately we're going to have to end up there. Again, like a massive round of applause for our 3 speakers. I really enjoyed that today. I've only read 2 of those books, obviously not read Good Enough, which is still not out, but it looks like all those books come highly recommended. But yeah, well, thanks again so much for joining. Thanks for the speakers for all their time and input into this. And yeah, hopefully be back at this next year. I might give January a skip, but hopefully back in February, which I hopefully will become a little bit more adept with using Zoom and providing the correct links to everyone. But I'll have a wonderful break, everyone. I think it's much needed after this year, and yeah, I'll see you all next year.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.